Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode with myself and Stephen. And it's not his idea, it's mine. I saw a recent post by Stephen Bartlett, who Stephen's told me off camera is getting a little bit of flack at the moment for some of his guests. But I've always followed him and quite liked what he does, although I don't watch many of his podcast episodes. But I do like his LinkedIn content. And he shared this image, which I don't think was his, but it was all about focusing on the controllables, i.e., what you can do, and not listening to all the noise that's going on outside. And I think that is something that a lot of people need a lot of help with. I'm quite lucky, and I don't know how this happened, whether I was just born this way, but I literally don't give a shiny about what anybody thinks about me, and I never have done. And in fact, I think it might have been helpful, certainly growing up, if I had, maybe just a little bit, because I might have cared about what people think. But I've always been happy to speak my mind. I've never really worried if someone doesn't like me, that's kind of their issue. But I've learned through coaching that that's actually quite a strength that I have. And it's something that I now look to instill in all my clients, try and help them understand that the noise isn't relevant. If people don't like you, it's okay. If you have a different view for somebody, it's okay. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to get Stephen's take and obviously put together a nice episode on this subject, because I'm pretty confident that 99% of people need to hear this. And we've probably got a few good insights as to how you can start looking at not worrying about the noise outside and control the controllables, which is only the stuff that you can control yourself. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I like this one, and I think a lot of things went through my mind as you opened up there. And there's a saying, isn't there, that um, you can't make everyone happy all the time, but you can make some people happy some of the time. And I think the controllables versus the non-controllables is really difficult because I think we think about sorting a problem, or we think about how can we make that right. What we don't think about is we don't go, oh, but let me just check, is that actually in my control or not? We dive straight into problem solving, and actually maybe what should happen before you start the problem solving is to identify whether or not it's actually something that you can control. And it is hard because I guess it's one of those things that flies in the face of a human. So the reality is, you cannot control what someone's going to say. You cannot control what someone's going to think. So that's sometimes a test. It's a test for us. So it's almost asking yourself that question first and foremost: can I actually control that? And then it's about living with it, because that's probably the challenge. It's being able to live with dealing with something that you can't control, but understanding that actually that will happen on any given day and you can't control it. Um, and that's probably what we have to live with, because you cannot control everything. And actually, if you try to control everything, you become a control freak. And actually, when you start trying to control everything that happens, you start micromanaging. And then on the back of that, you then end up in a situation where you always think you're right because there's only one way of doing something, right? Because you want to control everything.
Yeah.
And actually, I think you miss the love in the world. You miss the opportunity. You miss uncovering, inspiring people or situations because of it. So I think it starts off with managing the controllables and the non-controllables. Actually, it then spreads out into a big monster, if that's the right word to use, where actually, you end up causing yourself. The big thing I hear is anxiety. So when you try to control the non-controllables, i.e., there's nothing you can do to control that, that creates anxiety straight away. That creates uncomfort. That creates uncertainty, and I can go on and go on. And we've talked historically about one's confidence, and one's confidence can absolutely be destroyed if you're trying to control a non-controllable, because guess what, you're not going to be able to control it. So that immediately knocks your confidence. So yeah, don't know if that sort of unearth some things in you with my back comments.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, the immediate thing that comes to mind is I agree with all of that, absolutely, from the micromanagement point of view. And there's almost like a parallel opposite that I see sometimes with people with quite high empathy, whereas they see the problem in other people and they want to help people. And I think that's a really cool quality. I have very low natural empathy, which in some regards for the role I do, I think is quite helpful. But it means I'm not very perceptive sometimes. If my wife comes home, I'm now familiar. I know the signs, but I wouldn't have instinctively known when something's not right. Whereas my wife would definitely, because she's very empathetic, like opposites attract and all that. And she would pick up on something. However, the where we come in to help one another on this is she doesn't necessarily always need to intervene. So if we're talking about with the kids, for example, she would recognise something's got up, but I would know how to talk to the kids to find out whether they actually wanted to talk about it at that particular point. Because as you would know, anybody who's had kids, there are times when you talk about stuff and there are times when you leave it and you come up and deal with it later. But as someone who's picking up on feelings a lot, you can absorb a lot more feelings and think you need to fix them, think you need to help, when actually that's not what's needed. In fact, what's needed is for you to just be there or to just listen. So yes, you could be the micromanager who takes on everybody's work, or you could be the somebody who's highly empathetic, is like the go-to person, takes on everybody else's stress, everybody else's anxiety, because again, that's not in your control. You can, if you become trained and skilled in it, you can potentially coach them out of these challenges, definitely. But to look to try and fix it for them, I mean, blimey, if we did that, oh, I don't know. Well, we wouldn't be here, would we? We wouldn't have lasted. The amount of people and the amount of stress that we'd be burdening ourselves with. So you have to be able to detach yourself from it. So that's the first thing that I think of. The second thing is a bit of a plug for a book that I love called The Inside Out Revolution by a guy called Michael Neal. He's another coach, American-based guy. And it talks about something called the 3 principles, which I'm not going to go into in great detail. But one particular thing that I really love from it is an explanation about how external forces don't actually impact how we see the world. It's in here in our heads how we do. And the analogy is very simple. Take the film Star Wars, let's say the first one, New Hope. Let's assume we have a room of 100 people who've never seen that film, but we're putting them into the cinema and we're going to ask them to watch the film for the first time ever. And when they finish, they're not allowed to communicate with anybody. And afterwards, they get immediately interviewed and asked a load of questions. The questions will be the same. The only thing I can guarantee you is there may be as many as 100 different answers about what they liked about the film, what they thought about the film. They might have some common themes and understandings of the plot and the storyline, but some people would have loved Darth Vader. Some people would have hated Darth Vader. Some people would have thought his costume was cool. Some people would have thought it was ridiculous. All these things. And the only thing that you need to take from that is we've all experienced the exact same thing for a couple of hours, and we've all had potentially extreme or slightly different experiences. And if you then put that into the general world on a daily basis, it's what goes on in your head. So if you're unfortunate, and I do say it's unfortunate, if you're unfortunate enough to consume a lot of news media at the minute, it's very easy for your mind to run away with you that the world's in a terrible place, because that is pretty much all you're getting pushed 99% of the time. There's very little good stuff going on there. So if you've got that in good measure, you'll probably walk away from that media more often than not. But if not, you'll maybe just have small bite-sized chunks of it. You'll also realize that that is just a view of the world, and maybe you need to research it and understand it. And suddenly your thinking on the matter will change. So you can be in a room with someone watching the exact same terrible news and have completely different reactions. And that's all you need to really begin to understand, to know that how we feel is impacted by the way we think about it. And whether you believe me or not at this point, you can change the way you think about any situation. And I'll give an extreme one, which not everybody will enjoy, and then I'll let Stephen talk again. There is cases of people with terminal illnesses who are happy. It is the truth. They do it, and it's because they are able to look and challenge the way they think about it. Now, someone with a terminal illness, I know how I would respond, and it wouldn't be positively. I can tell how I would be right now. But though there are people out there who have the strength within them to be positive, even in those scenarios, which proves it's possible to change the way you think about it. And you know that's a very light touch way, but there's a dedicated number of articles about this linked in the book Inside Out Revolution. So I would encourage people to actually have a listen or read of that book, because it's very, very cool. But actually, this is why I wanted it, because I just thought that simple post that Stephen Bartlett did was just a picture, actually brought up quite a lot of emotion in myself. And I recognise it in a lot of my clients. So as I've then sort of reinforced back on what you've said, what more comes to your mind? Because obviously it's getting a bit deep.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a list, actually, a priority list. and a list of things that we sometimes need to do. And because we start at one end of the list and we go all the way down, and we don't think about, well, actually, what's actually in my control, that's where the anxiety comes from. Because what happens is your list is actually too big.
Yeah.
And actually, some of the lists, to prioritize it even more and give it another filter, it's what can I actually do something about and what can I not do something about? Because the reality is, in your head, you're thinking, well, that's failure, isn't it? But actually, it's not. It's if you physically or mentally cannot control something, that's not a failure. You need to be comfortable to put it to one side and go, right, but what can I control? Or the question I sometimes ask myself is, what can I have the biggest impact on? So, what are the things I can have the biggest impact on based on my knowledge, my experience, and where I've got to that point. And some things then get taken off the list. But you need to be quite brave to do that. And you need to be quite open to do that. And you need to be able to prepare to say to yourself, actually, I'm doing this because I can control it. And, I would say more than half of the people that I see, this affects them. And the reason why it affects them is because they're constantly putting so much effort into things they cannot control. They just cannot control them. And that's where the worry comes from. That's where the stress comes from on the things that you cannot control.
Yeah.
And also, I guess, I have another thing which I've been talking a lot about recently, and that is we're always being told to focus on our weaknesses. And I never understood that.
Yeah.
I've never understood that. And it's a little bit like this. Focus on what you can control and focus on what you're good at. Who says you have to necessarily think outside the box and do, work on your weaknesses when actually they make you miserable? And listen, I could have the best trainer in the world. There's no way I'm ever going to be good at swimming. Okay? It's a weakness. And it's something I do not enjoy. I just don't enjoy it. So asking me to do more swimming is just, I'm on a negative straight away.
Yeah.
Could I get better? Of course we can get better at anything if we keep going at it. But I'm miserable. It's not something I enjoy.
Yeah.
I might not drown because I can swim, but it's not something that I enjoy. So this notion of focusing on your weaknesses or focusing on the things that you can't control, because then eventually you'll control them, I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, so for me, it's almost using it as a filter, using it as a way of reducing that list. So go back to the list and going, what can I actually be in control of there? And if you can't, then take it off the list.
Yeah.
It's one great way of prioritizing it.
Yeah, no, I love that. The thing that's interesting is you have that thing about weaknesses, and you don't use the tool that I use, but that is exactly the way they talk. It's fascinating that. So I can see why me and Stephen get on so well, because I'm obsessed with a tool called Clifton Strengths. It's owned by a company called Gallup. It's the one continuous thing that I've used throughout my coaching and before, to be fair. And the guy who designed it, Don Clifton, who's sadly passed away now, but his son is still involved in the company Gallup. He's well known for many sayings, but one of them is, imagine what would happen if we start focusing on what is right with people rather than fixating on what is wrong with them. Because we don't believe in the Clifton Strengths world and the strengths-based development world in weaknesses. There's lesser talent. So you're lesser talented at swimming than perhaps a Olympic swimmer might be, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't do it, as you said. But is it worthwhile spending time doing the stuff that you aren't so good at? So what we do with that tool, and then you work on it, is you unlock what people's natural talents are, and then you find ways to make sure they do more of that. And more and more and more of it, and you acknowledge these so-called lesser talents, what other people would call weaknesses, and then you look for other people who can do that sort of thing, other people who thrive. Because another thing that we do is we presume that other people won't want to do the stuff we don't want to do. Some people love doing the stuff that we hate. Some people love swimming, Stephen. Honestly, it might shock you, but they genuinely
do. Like my daughter,
absolutely.
She loves swimming.
So and there's proof in the pudding right there. So there will be people out there, and this is the first thing that I realised in my sort of management and career and sort of, oh no, Alexa, oh, this is embarrassing. What's she going to...
Send Michael his email.
So there you are. See, one of my weaknesses is not remembering to do stuff.
And we're going to leave that in. We're so leaving that in.
I have to set myself reminders to do things. And secondly, I also need to set up a reminder to turn Alexa off, because I normally unplug her when she's in here. But we'll keep that in, because that's the first time in, 31 episodes that's happened. So that's embarrassing. However, what I have is a lesser talent for planning ahead. I'm up in the, I'm a strategic thinker and an influencer and a communicator and so forth. I'm not a natural people person, which is weird considering I'm a coach, but I am good at influencing people and organizing them and so forth. So I just focus on what I'm good at, and that's how I remain happy. If I was to do some of the things that are at the very bottom of my talent pool, I'd be miserable, absolutely miserable all day, every day. But there are other people who would love to do that sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely 100% agree with you about this weaknesses thing. Ignore it. If you think in a company, either if you're being asked to do this or if you run the company and you think that people should spend time training on the stuff they're crap at, you are wrong. It is a fact. It's not even up for debate. I'll happily have one with you, but you are wrong. You are making mistakes. You are wasting colossal amounts of money, because these people will never actually learn anything from it. They might get the shiny certificate, but they will never do it voluntarily. And even when they are doing it, they're giving you 50% or less capacity because they are miserable and they hate it. So please, please, please stop getting people to focus on their weaknesses. Find out what they're really good at, and let them focus on that, and they will blow your minds. If you can feed them fuel for their natural talents, they will absolutely smash it. So I'm really glad. I don't know how this came out of this particular one, but I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's like my number one passion. Focus on what people are good at. Anyway, I'm going to zip it.
Yeah, we really felt the passion on that one, Oliver.
Yeah.
I know it's great. I think it touches on something that I think many of us think about, and many of us have been there, where someone's saying to us, well, we'd like you to work on your weaknesses. And I know in my early part of my career, it was always pushed down the line on me. Yeah. And actually, I now know that focus on what you're good at. Focus on that. Someone else will be good at your weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Help them to focus on what they're good at. Yeah. And eventually, this is why building teams is so important. Getting that right mixture and right balance. So final thing for me then would be, on this one is to really focus on what you can control, and focus on the things that make you happy. Mm-hmm. And the things that you can't control are generally the things actually because it's someone else that can control it. So let that be. Yeah. Give it up.
No, I love that. And there's a little final thought for me. This is one to let you think, because it'll probably melt your melon a little bit. You've always been told you can become a well-rounded person, and I am one person who's going to give you the freedom to tell you that you cannot. You cannot become a well-rounded person, because to do that, you never get to do what you're good at. So let that one sink in, and whenever it's said, what nonsense is that, tell them who said it and send them my way, and I will prove it to them. So that's been a really good one for me. I've certainly got no final points. I think I've said more than enough. Do you have any final couple of words you want to add?
No, I'm still getting over the fact that we've got a subject that you are so heated on.
Yeah, I didn't realise.
That rant was pretty spectacular.
I didn't know this was coming, to be fair. So that's why we do it like this. Little prep, we just dive in, and that's what happens. So, and Alexa. Oh, well, that was embarrassing. Anyway, so those who are not watching on video, you didn't see my face go red when that happened. But ultimately, I hope that brought some amusement, because we're going to leave the Alexa alarm in. And apologies, Michael, but you're now famous. Right. Thanks very much for listening, guys. See you on the next one.